Learn Japanese history.
We are your navigators, Taro and Hanako.
Welcome. Today, we're diving into, well, a really crucial moment in Japan's story.
We're talking about the end of that long period of isolation.
Exactly. The arrival of foreign powers, the famous black ships, and what happened right after.
Understanding this is pretty foundational if you want to grasp how Japan became the modern country we know today.
So let's set the scene a bit. For more than 200 years, Japan had this policy, Sakoku.
Right, Sakoku, national seclusion, basically, run by the Tokugawa shogunate. It meant very limited contact with the outside world.
But things were starting to change by the mid-19th century. Pressure was building up from outside.
Yeah, Western countries were really pushing. They wanted trade, places for their ships, influence.
And you have to remember, they weren't operating in a vacuum. News travels.
Like the Opium War in China.
Precisely. Britain defeating China back in 1842 that really worried the shogunate. It showed what Western military power could do.
So they couldn't just ignore it completely. It led to a slight softening. They started agreeing to give supplies to foreign ships if they were shipwrecked.
A small concession, but a sign things were shifting.
Yeah.
And weren't the Dutch trying to nudge them open even before that?
They were. The Dutch king wrote letters, but they didn't really get anywhere at the time. The pressure kept mounting, though.
Then came the big one, the arrival of the black ships.
June 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry. He sails right into Edo Bay near Uraga.
With 4 American warships.
And these weren't the ships the Japanese were used to seeing?
No, definitely not. These were steamships. Paddle wheels, big, imposing, and belching black smoke.
Hence the name Kurofune Black Ships. You can imagine the shock, the apprehension.
A mix of fear and maybe intense curiosity, something totally new.
Absolutely. The scale, the technology, unlike anything they'd really seen. Now, the Americans, they had clear goals.
Whaling, right. The ships needed supplies.
Yeah, whaling in the North Pacific. They needed ports for food, water, fuel, and they wanted trade routes across the Pacific heading towards China.
Japan was kind of right in the middle, geographically speaking.
Perfectly placed. And Perry wasn't just there for a friendly visit.
No, he had a letter from the U.S. President, Millard Fillmore.
A formal demand, really. Open up your ports for trade, establish diplomatic ties. He presented it straight to the shogunate officials.
A direct challenge to centuries of policy.
And Perry made it clear he wasn't going to wait forever. He said he'd be back the next year for an answer.
So he leaves temporarily. And this forces the shogunate's hand, doesn't it?
It really does. They do something unprecedented. They actually consult the imperial court in Kyoto.
And the feudal lords, the daimyo, across the country, too.
Yes. Trying to figure out a response to this foreign pressure. It was a huge break from tradition.
And wasn't there someone else showing up around then, too?
Uh-huh. A Russian envoy, Puchetin. Also looking to open Japan up, so pressure from multiple directions.
Okay, so the shogunate is really feeling the heat. But opening up wasn't popular internally, was it?
Not at all. Lots of opposition. People worried about foreign influence disrupting their society, their traditions.
But then Perry comes back, January 1854.
And this time he brings even more ships, 7 of them, a bigger, more intimidating fleet.
His message was basically the same, but with more backup.
Exactly. Open up. It wasn't really a negotiation at this point.
Faced with that kind of power, what could the shogunate do?
Well, ultimately, they decided they had to give in. They couldn't realistically fight Perry's fleet.
So that leads to the first treaty.
The Treaty of Kanagawa, signed in March 1854, sometimes called the Japan-U.S. Treaty of Peace and Amity.
Okay, let's break that one down. What did it actually say?
Key things. First, Japan agreed to supply American ships food, water, fuel, the basics they needed.
Okay, what else?
Second, it opened 2 specific ports to American ships, Shimoda and Hokkaido.
Not full trade yet, but access.
Right. More about provisioning and shelter. Third, crucially, it allowed an American consul to live in Japan, a permanent diplomatic foothold.
And that last point,
Okay.
the most favored nation thing.
Ah, yes. Most favored nation status. This was important. It meant that if Japan gave any other country better terms in a future treaty,
The U.S. would automatically get those same terms.
exactly, it protected U.S. interests going forward.
So this treaty, Kanagawa, it wasn't the end of the story. More like the beginning.
Absolutely, it opened the door. After that, the shogunate signed similar treaties with Britain, Russia, the Netherlands.
So Sakoku, the isolation policy, was effectively over.
Pretty much. But these first treaties were just step 1. Things got more complex soon after.
Which brings us to Townsend Harris and the treaty named after him.
Right, the Harris Treaty of 1858, or the Treaty of Amity and Commerce. Harris arrived as the first American consul general in Shimoda back in 1856.
And his goal was a full-blown commercial treaty, actual trade.
Yes, he pushed hard for negotiations in Edo, which we now know as Tokyo, but he faced a lot of pushback.
Because the anti-foreign feeling was still strong.
Very strong. And the shogunate officials tried to stall, delay things.
But Harris had some leverage, didn't he? Something happening in China.
He did. The timing worked for him. News arrived about the Arrow War, the Second Opium War.
Where Britain and France defeated King China again.
Harris basically used that. He argued, look, this could happen to Japan too if you resist opening up to trade properly.
That must have been a powerful argument.
It was. It pressured the shogunate leadership, particularly Hara Masayoshi. They even took the unusual step of seeking the emperor's approval for the treaty.
Trying to get backing from the imperial court in Kyoto.
Yeah, hoping it would strengthen their position to sign it.
But the court said no.
The Emperor Komei explicitly opposed it, but then the man in charge, the Tairo, or Grand Minister,
Inosuke, a very powerful figure.
he decided to go ahead anyway. Signed the treaty with Harris in June 1858 without the emperor's consent.
Wow. That sounds like a controversial move.
Hugely controversial. It had major consequences down the line, fueling opposition to the shogunate.
So this Harris Treaty, much more detailed than Kanagawa. What were the main points?
Okay, it opened more ports. Kanagawa near Edo, Nagasaki, Niigata, and Hyogo, which is near Kobe. Shimoda was actually closed.
And cities, too.
Yes, Edo and Osaka were open for foreigners to trade in. Americans could now reside in these open ports.
And trade was supposed to be free between citizens.
Free trade, yes. But here are the really crucial and unequal parts. Tariffs, the taxes on imports and exports, were to be fixed by mutual agreement.
Meaning Japan didn't have full control over its own tariffs?
Exactly. Loss of tariff autonomy. These were the treaty tariffs. Also, opium imports were banned, which was one point Japan insisted on.
And the other big one, extraterritoriality.
Yes. This meant American citizens in Japan were under the jurisdiction of American consular courts, not Japanese law.
So if an American committed a crime...
They'd be tried by their own consul under American law, not by Japanese authorities.
Okay, so you can really see why these treaties are called unequal. Losing control over tariffs and having foreigners exempt from your laws.
Absolutely. It created a lot of resentment and became a major goal for Japan later on to revise these treaties and regain sovereignty.
It's quite something. And they even sent a ship to the U.S.
They did. In 1860, the shogunate sent the Kanrin Maru, a modern warship, to the U.S. to exchange the ratified treaty documents. Katsu Kaishu was involved in that voyage, a symbolic step.
And other Western powers quickly followed with similar treaties.
Yes, the Netherlands, Russia, Britain, France, they all signed similar deals soon after. These are often grouped together as the Ansei treaties, signed during the Ansei era.
So Japan was now formally plugged into the global system, but on terms that weren't exactly favorable.
That's a good way to put it.
Now, one direct result was these foreign settlements popping up. Yokohama is the famous example.
Yes. Interestingly, the treaty specified Kanagawa should be the port near Edo. But the shogunate, probably wanting to keep foreigners a bit separate from the main Tokaido highway,
They directed them to the small fishing village nearby instead.
Yokohama.
Exactly. They basically built a designated area there for the foreigners.
What did it look like? Was it walled off?
It was carefully laid out. A grid system divided into foreign and Japanese sections. There was a customs house. It wasn't walled exactly, but bordered by rivers and canals with checkpoints at bridges like the Yoshida Bridge. Controlled access.
And foreigners moved in quickly. Merchants, diplomats.
Oh, yes. Foreign merchants set up shop. They even had their own sort of municipal administration within the settlement. The consulates moved there from Kanagawa, too.
Exercising that extraterritoriality we mentioned.
Right. Applying their own laws to their citizens within the settlement. As it grew, residential areas expanded up onto the bluff overlooking the port, the Yamate area.
And weren't there foreign troops stationed there for a while?
There were. British and French troops were garrisoned in Yamate for a period, mainly for protection during the more turbulent early years.
So who was trading with whom in Yokohama? You had the foreign merchants, of course. They traded mainly with Japanese merchants from Edo, who set up branches there, kind of encouraged by the shogunate. And also local merchants, maybe from the surrounding Kanto area, coming to try and make a quick fortune.
Exactly. Though apparently some of the early trade involved, let's say, less than fair practices sometimes, speculation and sharp dealing.
Understandable, perhaps, in such a new environment. Did the settlement system last?
Well, the formal system with its specific regulations was abolished later, in 1899, when the treaties were finally revised. But even then, direct trade between foreign and Japanese firms across the country took time to become the norm. Yokohama remained central for a long while.
Okay, so opening the ports, signing treaties, foreign settlements. This must have shaken up Japan's economy quite a bit.
Oh, definitely. Huge impact. For starters, think about exports. Things like raw silk and tea were suddenly in high demand overseas.
So production ramped up, exports increased.
Which sounds good, but it led to shortages of these goods within Japan. And that meant prices for silk, tea, and other things went up.
Making life harder for ordinary people.
Yeah, especially lower-ranking samurai who were often already struggling, and commoners too. Inflation hit them hard. Plus, some merchants were apparently hoarding goods to drive prices even higher.
And then there was a gold and silver issue. That sounds complicated.
It was a major problem. You see, the exchange rate between gold and silver was very different in Japan compared to the rest of the world.
How different?
In Japan, gold was valued at about 5 times the value of silver by weight.
Huh.
So 1 unit of gold got you 5 units of silver.
Okay. And elsewhere.
Internationally, the rate was closer to 1 gold for 15 silver.
Ah. So if you were a foreigner, you could bring silver into Japan.
Exchange it for Japanese gold coins at the favorable 1-to-5 rate.
And then take that gold out of Japan where it was worth 3 times as much silver internationally.
Exactly. It was a massive arbitrage opportunity. Foreign merchants brought in huge amounts of silver, bought up Japanese gold coins, kopan, and shipped the gold out.
That sounds like a serious drain of Japan's gold reserves. It was enormous. Some estimates, looking at records from trading companies like Jardine Matheson, suggest maybe around 100,000 ryo of gold flowed out of the country this way.
Wow. That's a tangible example of how integrating into the global economy, especially with different financial systems, could be disruptive.
Definitely. And it highlighted Japan's vulnerability and fueled that desire to modernize its own systems quickly.
Did the shogunate try to stop this or control the trade chaos?
They tried. In 1860, they issued an order called the Gohin Edo Kaiso Rei.
The 5 goods Edo forwarding order. What was that?
It basically said that 5 key export items, things like raw silk, silkworm eggs, textiles, wax, maybe some others, had to be shipped first to wholesalers in Edo before they could be exported from Yokohama.
An attempt to control the flow and maybe stabilize prices through the established merchant houses.
That was the idea, centralized control. But it didn't really work. There was too much opposition. Local producers and merchants in the provinces didn't want to lose their direct access to the profitable Yokohama market. And the foreign merchants weren't happy either. The order was pretty much ignored or bypassed.
So, despite the efforts, the economic disruption continued.
Yeah, you can see it clearly in price records from places like Osaka during this time, sharp increases in the cost of living. And if you look at trade figures for Yokohama around, say, 1865,
What do they show?
they show exports dominated by raw silk and tea, and imports mainly consisting of manufactured goods like textiles and maybe some weapons. A classic colonial-style trade pattern almost.
And that gold outflow continued alongside the silver inflow.
Yes, driven purely by that difference in the exchange rates. It was simple profit-seeking, but it had major consequences for Japan's economy at a critical time.
Okay, so wrapping this up, Perry's arrival, the Black Ships, really did force Japan's hand, ending centuries of isolation.
Definitely. And the treaties that followed, especially the Harris Treaty, opened Japan up, but under these unequal terms, loss of tariff control, extraterritoriality.
Which, along with things like the gold drain and price hikes, caused immediate and significant economic and social disruption.
It was a period of immense, rapid change, really setting the stage for everything that came next, the fall of the shogunate and the Meiji Restoration.
So here's something to think about. We've seen how these first encounters were marked by this power imbalance, these unequal treaties. How might Japan's path to modernization have looked different if those initial interactions had been, well, more equal?
That's a fascinating question. And what long-term echoes of these treaties, things like extraterritoriality or the fight to regain tariff autonomy, do you think kept influencing Japan's policies and its view of the world, even long after they were formally revised? Something to ponder.